moment to welcome you all and thank you all for joining us this evening. Your attendance is greatly appreciated. And so I would like to begin by acknowledging the title of this event. The event is called Seen and Unseen, Artivism through the Royal Chicano Air Force. And so this is a conversation that we'll be having this evening with Eddie Salas and Roberto de la Rosa Jr. And so this event is actually part of a larger speaker series. This is the second plática that we're actually having. And so the theme of this event is actually called Seen and Unseen, the Ricardo Favela Expressions of Chicano Art. And so through the speaker series, we're exploring art, Chicano art, to see what art can reveal and bring forward to the forefront. So it's art with the purpose. And so Ricardo Favela, if you just go back to the previous slide, please. I want to just spend some moment to acknowledge the reason why we're actually getting into this speaker series. We're actually are coming together to honor the artwork and production and the life of Ricardo Favela's work of art. And so Ricardo Favela is from Dinuba, okay, everyone, from Dinuba, here Tulare County. Born in Kingsburg in 1944, he passed away in Visalia on July 15th, 2007. And Smith Mountain, Dinuba is his resting place. Before his passing, Ricardo Favela had a tremendous impact through the creativity of his art, instruction, and mentorship of many upcoming artists. His pursuits in higher education began at the College of the Sequoias. Okay, he graduated from the COS in 1965 and then transferred to Cal State Sacramento, where he would eventually become a professor of art, where he would eventually, and he was a founding member of the Royal Chicano Air Force, which we'll be discussing in greater detail throughout this evening's talk. So brace yourselves, we're getting into some fun stuff this evening, some very important artwork. Favela's work has been exhibited throughout the US, Mexico, Cuba, and Europe, and he is known for making use of calaveras in his artwork, like the one that you actually saw in the previous slide, where Ricardo Favela was posing in front of it, kind of that cubole pose that he was posed in front of that artwork. So as I mentioned, this is a speaker series. This is a speaker series that we've started. This is a second event. And so next slide, please. This is part of a speaker series, and the speaker series will have subsequent events. So I just want to make sure that everyone is aware that, you know, this is going to keep on going. And this is made possible through the collaboration of many partners, professors at COS, and also many who've been involved in moving this forward. So tonight we actually have two committee members who are your presenters today. We really want to thank our sponsors who are making this event possible. Without them, it would not be possible. So moving forward, I want to discuss and introduce you to our guest speakers. I would like to begin with introducing you all to Roberto de la Rosa, and then I'll move on and introduce Eddie Salas. And also want to highlight the fact that we also have two speakers today, originally from Tulare County. So this is awesome. So we're really accentuating a place-based pedagogy, everyone, in terms of the brilliance that has come here from the Central Valley. So with Roberto de la Rosa from Porterville, and from the young age of 19, he actually was already involved in a picture framing art gallery. So we have someone who actually has a long lived experience dealing with art, and someone who actually has multiple leadership positions here in the Central Valley. He's currently the Chief Operations Officer of Ola Raza, the VP of the Cultural Heritage Foundation, the Treasurer for the Center Valley Empowerment Alliance. And so he is someone who is really involved in all these different capacities, and someone who continues to pursue his education currently at Trinity Law School. So, you know, we're really excited to see the conversation that Roberto brings. And we also here for a treat with Eddie Salas. Eddie Salas, Fast Eddie Salas, became involved in the Royal Chicano Air Force. So this evening, everyone, we actually have someone who's a member of the Royal Chicano Air Force. So he was involved through his political activism in the Chicano movement. His particular contributions to the collective became through the practice of music, música chicana, and where he actually was a DJ for many years in La Onda Chicana at UC Davis, and he continues to DJ for events, and he holds a bachelor's degree from UC Davis in community and regional development with an emphasis in social cultural anthropology. He continues to pursue his education through the UC Berkeley Extension, working in child and adolescent treatment and trauma, and so he can have informed interventions. So he's actually continues to do work with youth in schools, juvenile correctional institutions, and community settings. So this is just a brief introduction of our presenters, and we're gonna get a chance to hear a lot more from them. So we're just really exciting to have them both with us this evening. So before moving forward, what I would like to do is just share this brief video. It's 4 minutes to give you a better understanding of the Royal Chicano Air Force. So we're gonna click on that and brace yourself and listen attentively.
The Royal Chicano Air Force is an innovative artist collective based in Sacramento. Founded in 1969, RCAF's mission is to provide a center where artists could come together and exchange ideas, provide mutual support, and offer cultural and educational programs to the Chicano community. The RCAF originally formed to foster support for Cesar Chavez and the labor organizing movement of the United Farm Workers. Jose Montoya and Esteban Villa, art professors at Sacramento State, founded the RCAF in 1969, together with their students Juanishi V. Orozco, Ricardo Favela, and Rudy Cuellar. Sons of migrant farmers, the cause of the United Farm Workers Union had particular meaning to this group of inspired and committed artists. RCAF initially stood for the Rebel Chicano Art Front, but as founder, Jose Montoya, explains, their identity was mistaken.
But the initials for Rebel Chicano Art Front happened to be RCAF. So all our posters and our murals just had RCAF. And people kept asking us what our connection was to the Royal Canadian Air Force, who have the same RCAF. And we said, well, we're not Canadians, we're Chicanos. Yeah, but, well, we have an Air Force. You do? Yeah. We fly Adobe airplanes. That was the big joke, you know. We wanted to be outrageous. We didn't want to be boring. So we now had an Air Force that we could incorporate into the movement. And the movement in those days was about protesting and about boycotting Safeway. And so the RCAF would go to these boycotts dressed in Air Force paraphernalia in a World War II Jeep. And when we used to go do boycotts at Safeway, wearing all our regalia, riding on that Jeep was made it more effective. I mean, people from buying grapes at Safeway.
Playing up their Air Force identity, the RCAF gained a well-deserved reputation for outlandish humor and community activism. They created murals in public spaces throughout California that portrayed the Mexican-American struggle for dignity and rights in vivid, vibrant colors. RCAF also became a springboard for educational initiatives such as Barrio Art Program and remains a vibrant force in the Sacramento arts community today. But it was the silkscreen posters of the RCAF that had the most profound impact.
To us, the silkscreen was not only art, it was something that you could produce multiples and you could incorporate lettering screening process. That's one of the things that Cesar Chavez and the Union found so useful and effective about who we were, is that we could load a silkscreen operation into a Volkswagen bus and go out to the fields and pass out fresh materials. Just all over, wherever the Union was, you'll find RCAF posters.
Used to educate, agitate, and organize, these posters played a key role in helping to raise wages and improve the working conditions of migrant workers. They were also instrumental in helping to establish the Chicano arts movement of the 1970s and 80s. Through their pioneering spirit and creative effort, the extraordinary people at the heart of the Royal Chicano Air Force serve as an inspiration for communities of all kinds to take pride in their cultural roots and to use art as a tool to express their history and struggle for equality.
I think that was just a wonderful overview. Gives you an idea of the Royal Chicano Air Force and the production of their art and how meaningful it was into supporting the Chicano movement. So I also want to encourage all participants, all of you who are attending this talk, to utilize the chat. You can, that's open for your usage to interact with one another. And also at any point at this presentation, during this plática, if you have a question, feel free to drop it in the Q&A as well. So we're going to get to the questions and answers at the end of this talk, but just want to let you know, if you have a question about anything that surfaced up from here on forward, those are there for your usage. So so this is next, what I would like to do is call Roberto de la Rosa, and we'll be discussing this very important theme here, this concept of artivism. So without further ado, we hear from our first presenter.
Thank you, Octavio. I would like to thank Dr. Lucia Vasquez and Fast Eddie, COS and CHAP, and of course the Favela Committee for inviting me to speak on this. Artivism is exactly what it sounds like. It is the combination of art and activism. Art is debatable, art is multiple definitions, but what I wanted to do is define activism, that other part. So I think it would make a clear connection. And I just looked this up myself today, but I know this definition. Consists of efforts to promote, impede, direct, or intervene in social, political, economic, or environmental reform with desire to make changes in society towards a perceived greater good. There's many different definitions. I like that one. I think it defines a lot of the work that RCAF has done throughout its long career. And it certainly made an impact in my life in a very unique way. So if we can go to the next slide, please. This particular poster that's basically a calling, it's for Chicano Law School Information Day. It attempts to remedy in a certain inequity, right? We know that in 1973, there was a real lack of people of color, Chicanos, Latinos, in law school. And we needed those advocates. Justice was an issue. There were injustices. I was born in 1971 to a couple of college students. My parents were in school at that time. My mom was recently here from Mexico City. She was doing a master's in political science at Fresno State. She came right after, she was an UNAM student, and came after the massacre at Tlatelolco in California to study political science. She meets my father at a hunger strike. And my dad was a machista. He was a portable college, former farm worker. He was ready to graduate, and he got a scholarship to go to UC Santa Cruz. I was a backpack baby, so I was going everywhere with them, the protests, the marchas, the eventos. And it really impacted sort of my way of looking at things from an early age. And so when I see this particular poster, my dad was an undergrad in 1973 at UC Santa Cruz. He sees this poster, understands that justice is obviously a big issue for farm workers. There's a farm worker movement at that time, and he decides to go to law school, in partly impacted by this poster. And so as it deals with the inequities of law students or people of color in law school, it attempts to remedy that, right, through this particular art piece. And so in 74, my dad starts to go to law school, and it really impacts him, right? And so he starts Ola Raza at that very moment when he goes to UC Hastings. So that's why I wanted to comment on this particular poster, because it had an impact on my life. Eddie, can you tell us a little bit about what was going on?
I wanted to say that the poster is done by Villa, Esteban Villa, and if you see the images of Villa, he always uses a jalapeno, and the letters and the lines coming out of the mouth of the lawyer, and then they reach a division point, like the scales of law, right? And then the talking stick. But more than this is the RCAF at this time, because of their involvement with the UFW, they're starting to get a lot more noted for their artwork, and people are calling on them to do posters, to do a lot of different events. And education, law school, that was very close because they come out of Cal State, Sacramento, Sac State. So it just it's a perfect fit. And so all the images, and these are the first days. These are the first law school informational days. Remember, this is 1973. So there it is there, clean. The next slide, please. And so for me, my name is Eddie Salas, and I came to meet the RCAF in 1975, and a friend, I had moved from LA to Pittsburgh. And my friend Fernie says, let's go to La Raza bookstore. So we go down the river road, we go to the La Raza bookstore, and there's two people in this tiny little storefront bookstore, early on Chicano bookstore. Luis Gonzalez, and Philip Santos, the Pike. And they were essentially the caretakers of the bookstore for many years. Louis introduced me to other people as time went on. That's how I met Carlos Favela. But if you see Louis' work Louis a poet, but Louis an artist, and Louis in the Siesta 14, you could see his creativity with the Huelga Eagle almost in flight. And that was a very big issue happening during 1975. And then on the other side, you got Montoya, Jose Montoya. And the thing about this poster of Montoya, he drew it all. Except for the Huelga Eagle, Jose drew the whole thing. And of course, it's inviting people to a meeting at Woodland High School, because Cesar used to go around. The RCF and the UFW were very close. And the RCF did many of these posters, just like Montoya said at the beginning. They were very close, and the relationship with the UFW and the RCF extends, to this day. So, the next slide now. This poster is an interesting poster because it's 1975 and it's an homenaje to las mujeres. And I just want to say that the RCAF, yes, of course, it was a male-dominated organization, but I just want to name some names of some women, and then I'll explain the actual poster. But you had women like Mary Montoya, Gina Montoya, Irma Lerma, Clara Cid, Luzma Espinosa, Gloria Rangel, Irma Rangel, Elvia Nava, Lupe Portillo, Rosemary Rasul, Lucy Montoya and her sister Susie, Pat Carrillo, Francis Godinez, Florisa Cordova, Manuela Serna, Melinda Rasul, Olga Cid, Jenny Baca, and Juanita Montoya. And so right here you have Rosemary, Rosalie Sosa is in the forefront, and she's being confronted by the police at a strike in Yuba City, and the police are going to take her in. So basically, she's confronting the police. The police are confronting her, and that's Juanita Antoveros on the side looking on. And Juanita Antoveros to this day is a major force of organizing for the UFW in the Sacramento region, and she's done a lot of work with the California Rural Legal Assistance. But this particular poster was a photograph by Hector Gonzalez, who is Louis the Foot's brother. And there's a lot of cooperation between Hector and Louis and photo silkscreen. But this is a classic homenaje to International Women's Year in 1975.
What I really find impressive about this particular piece is that it honors, it celebrates International Women's Year, but it's a reminder, right? It has this element of luchadoras that are not afraid to confront the police. It's very intentional. It's confrontational, and I think it blends the intention, right, of like we're celebrating, but it reminds us of what kind of struggles exist and how it's trying to remedy, again, sort of like these social ills through protesting, through activism. And this is 1975. Artivism won't be coined as a phrase till like 1991, 90s and beyond, but this is a good example of what we're talking about in terms of work for artivism. Next slide.
This is a classic poster of Maximino Garcia, who recently passed. And Maximino Garcia was born and raised in Sacramento, and Maximino went to Sacramento High School. Then he went to the Art Center of Design in Pasadena. And you would say, wow, Max, went to Art Center of Design. But one thing you have to know about Max is he was colorblind. So Max is an artist who's colorblind, but his association with Louis the Foot, who's mentioned to me that color changed his life. So when you get these two together, what you see here is a food stamp with juxtaposed with the Last Supper. And Max is a writer. Max always would write. And Max said, food, anything that nourishes or stimulates whatever helps to keep active and enables it to grow and live. Food stamps, something welfare workers issue to poor once a month to nourish their misfortune and stimulate their despair. So this was actually a part of a calendar series in 1976. And so all the artwork, the calendar dealt with food. So there you go. That's and in the corner on the right side, you see the application for food stamps, the old school application for food stamps. So Max really utilized everything, and of course Louis pulled it and his wonderful colors, and he made it pop, and it's a classic of Max Garcia's, and it says so much.
In a conversation with Rudy Cuellar that I was interviewing him, he really told me that Max really put a lot of messaging into the work that he did. This is a powerful image to put the Last Supper, to put Jesus in a print. I'm sure at the time in this format was radical, right? It was very. It was new. The technique is new. The fact that he's there with the apostles, you see the picture of these men in the background from the U.S. Department of Agriculture making these decisions, and you can see that it's intentional to cause you to react to it, and it makes you want to read it. It's the red against the yellow. I think it calls out to you. We know those are McDonald's colors. They know that invokes hunger. There's a psychology around those colors, and that was very important to utilize. Considering that he was colorblind, I think that it's remarkable that he would decide to do that. And I know that as a collective, they work together. Rudy tells me that Louis the Foot and Rudy were very good at the technique. They're very technical, the technicians of the group. And to produce this kind of work, it was really remarkable. I love the words that he has here at the bottom that says, these Last Supper food stamps are brought to you by the President Ford, Earl Butz, the Department of Agriculture, and all the people that are now out of jobs. And it's very, the messaging is very confrontational. It's almost ironic, right? And what's going on here to stimulate despair is also to keep them in their place, right? As long as they're fed and they're not hungry, they won't rebel. And so there's a lot going on in this print. I would love to see it in real person. I hope it comes out in the collection that we look at. But that's what I think what's really going on in here is that intentional. Again, we see it, right? Artivism.
This is I think I would hope that Roberto and I, we've been talking about this and how the RCAF now is starting to expand not just art or posters and things for the UFW, but also in the community, they start to be much more active. And Breakfast for Niños is a program that used to feed kids at the Washington Neighborhood Center in the mornings from 7 to 8. And it's modeled after the Black Panthers program to feed children because they were the ones that brought to the forefront that kids cannot learn on an empty stomach. And so the RCAF used this, and in this poster, there's women behind it. Rosemary Rasul, Jenny Baca, Lupe Portillo, and Elvia Nava were the ones that were kind of running it. Eli Nunez was a part of it. And this was a big program for the RCAF. It was a big part of the early on activism in the local community. And then on the other side, we have Operation Christmas Unity, which was a similar program like Toys for Tots, but it was toys for Chicano children of color tots because they weren't receiving a lot of support. So the RCAF took this upon themselves to do. This is Armando Cid did this poster, and it says benefit for children in the barrio. And so basically, it would be a time when toys were gathered, and then they'd have a Christmas party with music, with piñatas, and all for the children. So these two posters, you see, there's a focus on the kids, and we'll see that focus evolve with some other posters. But yeah.
What I like about this moment in RCAF is that they're growing right beyond an artist collective. They're starting to do programming in the community. It's not just about the art or supporting through the arts. It's now they're actually getting involved in the community in a way that's stepping it up. It's a little bit more. We had talked about that by now. The RCAF collective was probably about 40, 50 deep, and it was growing. It was inviting a lot of activists and community members and people interested in the arts and helping out in the community. And you see a real sense of like cultura cura in this music and piñatas, right? It's like let's celebrate our culture, let's bring people together, let's talk about things. And we see a real sort of evolution at this point where RCAF is starting to really grow and expand its influence in the community.
I guess also, if I may add to another point there, Roberto and Eddie, Eddie did a really good job on the, thank you, this screen here, in terms of naming so many women, so many mujeres who were critical and involved in the Royal Chicano Air Force. And with just drawing attention here to the poster produced by Esteban Villa with the Breakfast for Niños. You have, that's also like an early precursor to free breakfast programs in schools. But this is also an idea that really formed through collaboration with certain members in the Royal Chicano Air Force, particularly Irma Lerma Barbosa stands out in terms of her involvement before with the Brown Berets, establishing the Brown Berets in Sacramento, and also collaborating with the Black Panther Party in Oakland, which also had this free breakfast programs. Again, that was like the archetype for these what would become then later on free breakfast programs in schools that are so typical today. So that kind of activity, those sorts of social interventions, having these kind of serious impacts on a broader terrain later on. And this is also reflected in the post art as it indicates Breakfast for Niños. So these kinds of programming is very important. These are topics of nutrition.
Yeah, that's what we call, food justice now, right? Next slide.
And that's good, Roberto. You bring up the kind of like what happened then and what's happening now, and these two slides are very important because now there's a whole study and notion of indigeneity, and it comes from these times. This is a poster, Fiesta de Maíz by Rudy Collard, and you see all the elements that he uses. And one thing I know I like about Rudy is he always used the N backwards. That's kind of like one of his trademarks, you know, and the I crossed with the next. But from right here, what you see is before we had ceremonias in Sacramento, they were called fiestas. And you have a person, and I have to give a shout out to Jesus Jesse Chuy Ortiz Ocelot, who really was the leader of the Danza Azteca in Sacramento up until his death. He evolved with it, and there's no doubt that Chuy was involved in this fiesta. And on the other side, you have a poster of the person who really brought that notion of indigeneity to the state of California, who's that Florencio Yescas. And Florencio Yescas from Mexico City with his group Esplendor Azteca. They were like the premier danza to first come to California. They went all over the state. And from that, we started to get, in Sacramento, started to come other people. And one of the persons that came was Dr. Arnoldo Solis. And Dr. Solis was one of the first to pioneer Chicano mental health. And he pioneered the words La Cultura Cura. And with Maestro Yescas and his relationship with my Senora Cobb, and it just really evolved in Sacramento, the whole Danza Azteca, to now there's many Danza Azteca, and it has an old history. And so now instead of fiestas, they're called ceremonias. And there's ceremonias at different times of the year. And at Southside Park is really where the Danza Azteca was born and stays as much as can happen now, because now, because of different rules, they can't always use the park. But I think it's very important to show that this notion of Arnoldo Solis came out. Now we have the Compadres Network. In LA, we have Las Mujeres de Maíz. We have all these evolutions that came out of, you know, the danza, because there was only 5 danza groups in the whole state until 1992, the 500 years anniversary of colonialism. And then, of course, there's many more, but originally there was only like 5 groups, and Sacramento had one of the original ones. And they weren't all Azteca as we see now. They were very, as we call it, rascuachi, with feathers that they painted and trajes that they just made up. But you see how from this moment it really has evolved, of course.
It's definitely a moment when indigenismo had its in Chicanismo was very much apparent. You see it in the artwork, and in this particular slide, the Fiesta de Maíz, what I find it very powerful is that it almost represents like a rebirth, right? Where a dawning of a particular age of consciousness. And what I find really interesting is that it says no booze on the lower right-hand corner. And in my conversations with Rudy, he was telling me that, you know, when you have these social events, and you know, a lot of our events was accompanied with beer, right, and alcohol. And in many cases, for a lot of groups, that was what brought in money to keep you funded. We'll talk about funding in the taller later, the Centro de Artistas Chicano, because that's, you know, they lost money. But in this particular case, it's a really new step, right? Of like, we're gonna have this event, it's gonna be sober, there's no booze involved. And so it really invites the community to come to a celebration and enjoy it without the concern of alcohol. And at that time, alcoholism in our communities, we're talking 1976, we have Vietnam vets returning to the barrio, and alcoholism is at a high, right? And we're a target, you know, just like a lot of low-income poor communities have markets with malt liquor. And so this is very symbolic of a decision, a conscious decision to say, no mas. We're going to move forward and we're going to heal ourselves with things like ceremonia, right? So the danza azteca and is very key to our community. It's key to our events, and it's part of our celebration is that ceremonia aspect. So I think this particular time is very important in our Chicano history. Next slide.
This is a poster for a New Year's Eve dance by Max Garcia. And you can see how Max is designing and, and the blends and all that, which for somebody just looking at it, okay, it looks like a poster, but, I think, again, going back to what Jose said about the ability to use silkscreen posters in all kinds of very innovative ways. And of course, Louis was the master of this innovation, and Rudy is his compadre. So you see this kind of working off of each other. And of course, Max, is a designer too. But the most important thing about this poster is that Progreso was a TV program. Mm-hmm. That it was a public TV program that aired on Sunday mornings, and Max Garcia was the first producer director. And so they have this TV program, and they bring in poets, they bring in art, they bring in plática, they bring in bands, live bands. And this is some of the first time that you get local, down home, Chicano television in any community. Mm-hmm. And it lasted, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 years, but it was significant. And from this you get people, branching out into mainstream media. And mm-hmm. So this was very, very important because you never saw that before. You never saw yourself and under the guise of something that was rascuache, right? Something that was not really packaged, something that was down home and organic as you can get. And that was Progreso.
So many great shows came out of this kind of model. Here in Tulare County in Central Valley, it's Arribas Valle Central, right? Where that's the one place where you can see the local activists and the community leaders speak about issues that affect our community, right? And Progreso was really groundbreaking, particularly at that time, to be able to be on the airwaves, right? So they're crean fama, they become famous doing silkscreen posters on events and different kinds of subject matters. But here you see that they actually get time on a local television station, like community television. For those of you who know, I used to produce some work at Santa Cruz Community Television when I was an undergrad at UCSC. And these outlets were extremely important and very valued because you never got to see anybody from your body on TV. So to be able to have a show that would highlight and talk about our cultura, our issues, was really progressive, ahead of their time. And it really opened the door for a lot of the community TV stations or TV shows that you see now. That's great.
This is a very significant, these two posters, what they represent, and again, an evolution of the RCAF, and it's really interesting because, so I'll go with the Chicanito Science. Well, I'll go with the Chicanito Science Project, and then I'll talk about Barrio Art. But the Chicanito Science Project is, if you see, it says ASCSUS, Associated Students of CSUS. So basically, they would get a grant from the student body. There are only $3,000-4,000 for the whole year to buy supplies, and they go into the schools and they do science projects with kids in the schools. And you'd sign up as a student at Sac State. You'd sign up to be part of this. And this is the thing: is this is, Sam Rios Jr., Zenon Valadez, professors. Albino, and I don't know Albino's last name, but he's very involved in it. But this is the precursor to the STEM program. This is, you know, the STEM program comes out of thoughts like this. So the RCF is already thinking about art and science. And like Villa says all the time, Esteban Villa, General Villa, art and science go together. You can't have one without the other. And so the barrio art is one of the mainstays of the RCAF in terms of community. It's a bridge between Sac State and the community. It's really a class that Montoya developed. It's art education. So the people who wanted to be teachers, they take this class as an elective. They go to the barrio, to Washington Neighborhood Center. Montoya and Favela had a book of different projects that the students would take on. Very simple, very basic. They teach them to the kids in the barrio. And as it evolved, it was in effect for 38 years. Favela was involved with it. Ricardo Favela was involved with it for 38 years. Montoya developed it, and it kept on going. And then Chuy Ocello became part of it, and he teaches Danza Azteca. And so, again, the barrio art would probably get a grant of $5,000 for the whole year, wouldn't pay no wages, would buy all supplies because it was all free. And then Favela would give $500 to Chuy, who'd buy feathers, chachayotes, some copal, and they'd have a danza. And so later on, if you took an art class or art education, you could take Danza Azteca or you do barrio art. And then it evolved even more because on Thursday nights, they'd have it for the ancianos. And Montoya would buy up all these to knit. He'd buy to crochet. He'd buy all this yarn. And the big thing, and I went, one time only, and Favela would always invite me, is the ancianos, of course, would make food. And it'd be a get-down potluck with all these elders, all these grandmas, grandpas there, and they get down on some comida. So it was a big thing, but it was a mainstay downtown because the Washington Neighborhood Center has always been like a hub of gathering for the Mexican American Chicano community, Mexican community there on 12th and D. So 16th rather, 16th and D. Yeah. So anyway, this is a very, very pivotal project of the RCAF Barrio Art. It's famous. Thousands, literally thousands of teachers were educated through Barrio Art program. So it was very, very important.
Well, I love this particular project because it looks to recruit more Chicanos in science, right? It's kind of like in law, you start looking around and seeing who's there. I think it's important to note that it was the Mechistas of the 60s at Sacramento State that really lobbied the administration to bring more people of color onto faculty at Sac State. And two of those people were Esteban Villa and Jose Montoya. And when they come onto campus, and there were many others, very notable professors from Sac State that came in to teach at that time. But at this particular time, by 75, as two of the art teachers at Sac State, lots of students, I think they're starting to realize the influence and the impact that they're actually having in their community. And again, sort of branching out, the idea that they could partner with the Associated Student Body to recruit Chicanos into science. We're still trying to do that right now, right? We're still trying to get more doctors and more scientists, Chicano and Chicanas into those programs. But this is 1975, and you see the model here happening with this particular example of poster art. And in terms of the Barrio Art program, I know that they had one for kids, and then they would take the kids also with the seniors, as far as I know, and there's some art therapy, which is a really nice mix of like youngsters and gente tercera edad, right, elders. And that is also part of our cultura, right, is to like get our youth, our children together with our elders. And there's a lot of healing that's happening there. It's certainly a bonding experience. and they're provoking that through their programs. Next slide.
Yeah, this is a very interesting bridge between back then and today. And for this, you know, on the right, you have the East County Resource Center, East Contra Costa County. And I'd like to acknowledge an elder who has passed as well, and that's Frank the Fox Godinez, because Frank Godinez was a philosopher, a Chicano philosopher extraordinaire, and he taught Chicano studies at Folsom Prison. So Pavela would always say, have causa, will travel. And we'll go anywhere the Raza's at. And so he taught at Folsom Prison. But this time is post-Vietnam. There's a lot of people coming back from Vietnam, strung out on drugs, going to prison, getting in trouble. There's gang activity at this time. There's a lot of things happening. So this resource center, really, we could say, is a precursor to the school to prison pipeline as we know it today.
Yeah.
But they're already starting to realize there needs to be help for this segment of our community. And how it plays out in today's politics right now is Proposition 17, which would allow parolees to vote. And there's a significant amount of parolees in the state of California, because we have to remember, in the 1980s, the legislature voted to take money from public education to build one of the most ambitious prison industrial projects in the modern world. So we went from 13 prisons in California to 33. We went from 25,000 prisoners, adults, to 170 at its max. We expanded the juvenile justice system, juvenile halls, everything expanded. So this is very significant. And again, I wanna note the Fox, because the Fox was a person who would give the prácticas, who would give the breakdown of this. And he was very Chicano, very calm, very cool, extremely bright. And on the other side, it's interesting because I think Roberto mentioned this about. Why don't you talk about this?
Thank you, Eddie. Thank you, Eddie. I think it's the Baca, and I know we're out of time in terms of we want to go to Q&A, but I think what's really important about the Baca decision is that, you know, it was threatening to halt affirmative action, and we had already made all this progress. You know, our gente was going to school, they were pursuing higher education, there were universities. You could see that there was activity, community building. There was, you know, these students coming back to their barrios and doing projects. And so this particular decision threatened to stop that progress in its tracks. And that's threatening. And that caused a lot of turmoil, disruption, nervousness, and there was a lot of activity, right? We lost that decision. And exactly what was feared, we started to experience, right? The drop in numbers for people of color enrollment, you know, dropped dramatically. The return of university students to their communities with degrees dropped dramatically. Right now on the ballot, we have an opportunity to reverse that particular decision, Prop 29, by voting yes on Prop 16. And you know, I'm not trying to sway you, but I think it's a good idea to vote in favor, because we do need to reverse that. And we're time. I see the text. Thank you. Next slide. My goal was to become a writer of Chicano stories. I had a fascination with words, and the fact that I was bilingual only added fuel to the fire. Louis the Foot. It's just brilliant.
Yeah, I wanna read a little bit about this poem, but I want to acknowledge two other people that were significant, because when I think of Louis, well, of course, his compadre Rudy, but also the Pike, Philip Santos, who was originally the head of the La Raza bookstore, which grew into Galeria Posada. So it was La Raza Bookstore, Galeria Posada, because the RCAF has a strong tie to the work of Posada in the posters that he made in Mexico City during that time, looking out his window, seeing all the upheaval. The RCAF essentially did the same thing in Sacra and all over Califas. And the person I also want to acknowledge, Tere Romo, who was the art historian of the RCAF. And I want to give her the props because she deserves the props. And, you know, she has a lot of knowledge as well, academically, but just down home, her and her sisters were always around the RCAF. So I want to read this poem, his famous poem that Louis wrote, que se llama Cortés nos chingó in a big way, el way, but or the way rather. I can't read it all, but I took some of it and I translated it. So I want to read this, and it says, I swear something is very wrong. Con tanto corazón que tenemos, maybe if Gloria stops hassling Maria and Josefina quits messing around with Jose, whose carnal Hector is gonna put Ramon's luces out, y tal vez if Jorge makes up with Carlota, maybe things wouldn't be so bad. But you know how it is. Juan still hates Antonia because she was screwing Ernie, and Ernie's brother Rufino is after anybody. While Manny's cousin got jumped by Chuy and Tavo after the dance where Chris got shot in the earlobe by one of the Garcias who was really trying to get Paula's little sister for spitting cheese mess. About how unreasonable and hot-tempered the Garcias are. Man, que tiempo tan chingado. Excuse me, please. I'm gonna go look for Ricardo to watch me kick Clint Eastwood's hunky ass. And I apologize for using the foul language, but I want to just say this. This is really a poem about us looking at ourselves as Chicanos, and kind of like a criticism, self-criticism. And in this project, I think what we've tried to do is bring some consciousness. And we've brought these posters together as a collective. And what we're really trying to do is continue to educate the young and old and keep it going, because the movimiento is not dead. We're all part of it. And we still have issues that we have to confront. And instead of maybe saying that it's this people's fault, that people's fault, maybe if we look within and we work collectively as we've been trying to do to put on the show for Ricardo Favela, I think that we can get a lot of places. And I would just end it by saying, I hope that the students, the young people, or even the older people, utilize College of Sequoias as a place to educate themselves. And because there's some wonderful instructors, there's an opportunity to learn and to take it further and to help the whole Condado de Tulare. And that's really what we're trying to do here.
Thank you, Eddie. For my part, I just want to wish everybody. I want to invite everybody to continue with us on these pláticas. I think the dialogue is going to expand. I think we're going to try to be very inclusive to a lot of different voices. Artivism is a newer term, but we gave examples of how this activism through art has been a part of our culture for many years. And like Eddie said, we want to continue this because this movimiento is alive, and we're in the struggle together still.
Thank you. This brings us to the part in this event where we're going to have a moment to have Q&A. I just want to acknowledge and thank you both, Eddie and Roberto, for covering so many pieces of art. Over a dozen pieces of art you just covered, and with so much meaning that reflects the trajectory of the Royal Chicano Air Force and touching so many meaningful actions. So with this, at this moment, for all of you who are with us right now, this is an opportunity for you to drop your questions in the Q&A. There's several in there already, which I'll be reading to Roberto and Eddie for you, to either one of you to respond to. And so at this moment, we can transition to this. And so if you have a question about any pieces of art that you actually saw this evening, this is a moment to maybe, get that curiosity, get those questions that you have in your mind answered. So what I would like to do at this moment, I would like to ask one other questions that were given so far. So there's several in here. And so one of the questions that was dropped in the Q&A box is asking, was the Royal Chicano Air Force just centralized in Sacramento, or was this a nationwide Artivism movement? So either Roberto or Eddie, would you like to touch on this question or respond to this question? There's a curiosity in terms of, was the Royal Chicano Air Force only in Sacramento?
I'll answer it. The Royal Chicano Air Force is based in Sacramento, and most of its work was out of Sacramento, but surely they've been all over the world. Different people have, through their art, have been all over the world, and they're in many institutions like the Smithsonian and different major institutions, but their work was done mostly in Sacramento. Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to chime in on that. I know that the Centro de Artistas Chicanos, which is the centro that Villa and Rudy and Montoya put together, along with the other RCAF members, with a grant, was very important to their establishing themselves in Sacramento. As far as I know, the California Chicano artists was a network that connected several of the collectives at that time, from San Diego to LA to Oakland. There was a broad dialogue going on in terms of artists and activists, but definitely centralized in Sacramento.
And this is, I think, something we talked about before, and you mentioned in a previous conversation, Roberto, there is, I think, an importance of bringing in also Chicano Park in this discussion too, right? In terms of seeing like the extent and, different places, and Chicano Park being a very important location, right? Where the Royal Chicano Air Force was also involved in the painting of some of those murals, right?
Yeah, and Eddie could speak on it. What I know is that, not a lot of artists were invited to go down to Chicano Park, and that RCAF members were of the few that were invited to participate in that particular project. Eddie, he knows.
Well, I was just thinking about this. Not necessarily before I answer that. I want to also acknowledge Juanishi and Juan Cervantes. Juanishi still alive. Juan Cervantes passed. John Carrillo. There's other members that were significant. So we just talked about the ones because of the art that we showed. But yes, from what I understand, the Villa had a pillar. Favela was there, Montoya, Juanishi. I think Celia Rodriguez, another female who participated with the RCAF, who's still very active in academia at UC Santa Barbara. But that was the first time. I think there was a couple of trips, if I'm not mistaken. There's been a couple of trips, and it didn't hurt that Armando Cid is married to Josie Talamantes, who is from Logan Heights and is very much involved in Chicano Park. In fact, she was the one that helped make Chicano Park a national monument, and now is developing a museum. So that connection there between San Diego and Sacramento is real tight, just as San Francisco, La Raza, Galeria de la Raza, and Sacramento artists, and Fresno artists,
yeah,
and LA artists. There was a big collective of artists.
All right. I have another question, guys. I think there's a question specifically on one of the posters that was displayed earlier. And I believe I think the question is in reference to the poster where the police are in confrontation. So the question is, what specifically were the women fighting for in the previous slide? So this is kind of measuring and timing that question to that. And so
That one.
so I think the question is specifically to this poster. So if they're wanting to know, a little bit more context.
Well,
What is a
I want,
conference?
go ahead.
Just what I think maybe what is a confrontation about?
The confrontation is in Yuba County, and the union was trying to organize workers in Yuba County, and this is a strike, a calling out of workers, and there's a confrontation between the police and Rosalie Sosa and Juanita Antaveros looking on, and then we're going to actually arrest Rosalie. I don't know if they actually did. I got the story the other day too again, but because she was, when the police asked her name, she gave them a fictitious name, and she kept on saying her name, and it was like a indigenous name that she used, and the police were getting extremely upset at her. But it was at a strike in Yuba City, up that way, in Yuba County.
Gotcha. Thanks, Eddie. And there's also questions in terms wanting to know more about the involvement and the role of women. Would either one of you like to speak on there's an interest of wanting to know more about the role of women in the Chicano movement, in the Royal Chicano Air Force. So if either one of you would like to address that question.
Well, I'd like to there's a big gap in the history, and particularly in this part. And I think it's a really good question to make, because they come out, there's a picture, and there's a lot of stories behind a lot of the artwork about the women's roles. I only bring it up because I consider my mother a woman in the Chicano movement. My sisters also had roles in the Chicano movement. But I don't think there's enough written. I'm certainly not the scholar on the issue, but I know that wherever I went, there, in terms of the movement, the protests, the events, mujeres were always in leading the way, right? Even though they didn't occupy all the leadership roles. Dolores Huerta was obviously a huge icon of the Chicano movement, and she had a lot of followers and a lot of following. And you can't have a movement without women. I think the role of women in the Chicano movement was tremendous, but I think we could use a lot more scholarly work around the subject.
Yeah,
Eddie?
I'd just like to follow up with, there was women involved, with the RCAF, but I think, as Roberto said, we don't have such a focus on them, and we've learned a lot from that time, that it was very machista, and there's no doubt about it. But I think that from that point, and maybe many decades back, it's very clear that Las Chicanas are leading the way. And I think when you had people like Gloria Abdaldua, Sherry Moraga, women like that, and even participants around Sacramento, women who are still active, Juanita Antiveros, there's just a lot of women, but they don't get their due.
No, they do not.
No, they don't get their due. So I think that by us acknowledging that, I think we're moving forward. Does it make it better? No, but at least we're able to talk about it now and not argue and say that's not true, because it is true. So.
Yeah, and I think that it's worthy for sure that we bring it up in the next pláticas, right? We really need to talk about that. I think that is men coming, Chicano men in the struggle. There's a lot of issues that we haven't talked about, because that wasn't what tonight was about. But we do need to talk about those, recognizing those issues in the movement. I think are very important aspects of our own sort of like healing and moving forward.
I think that we're going to be in for a treat on our third plática, because we're going to have Barbara Carrasco.
That's right.
And Barbara Carrasco is a woman that's going to tell it like it is, as she has ever since I've known her. And so I think we're in for a treat because I think she will fill in a lot of these gaps that we as men are not able to really address. And not that we're making excuses, but for sure we're bringing Barbara on as a person who did a lot of work for the union, but also as her artwork in her own right is very, very significant. So I think as a committee, we're doing a good thing. I mean, we're learning. We have learned.
I just wanted to mention Yolanda Lopez's Who You Calling Illegal Pilgrim, that was really impactful in my life. That single piece of artwork made me look at our particular situation in a different light. I felt very empowered by that image. It's an image I have hanging on my wall because it reminds me, right, of our reality as indigenous to this country, indigenous to the Americas, and yet made to feel that we don't belong here. And when you're young and you're looking for your place and you're looking for acceptance, and you realize that just it's not coming, images like these, really radicalize you. They really make an impact on your consciousness. And I credit Yolanda Lopez for helping me recognize that in myself. So thank you.
I can't, I was thinking about, I can't let this go without, because we're in Tulare County.
Mm.
And we cannot, Sun Mad Raisins.
That's right.
Esther Hernandez.
Mm.
Sun Mad Raisins is the most reproduced piece of Chicano art in the United States. And it's about sun-made raisins right down the road on the 99, right in Tulare County. And Esther is also from Danuba. So, a significant Chicana voice in Esther is a homegrown homie from Danuba, a friend of Ricardo's. And so I think we cannot, it would be wrong to not mention her, not acknowledge her artwork as well.
Octavio, if you allow me, I see this question here in the chat,
Yeah.
and I think it's really important. Can you also talk about the erasure of queer Chicanas in the movement? And this is a very, very specific area of work, of plática that is difficult to talk about in this particular session because there's so many issues around the way that the LGBTQ and the queer community were treated in the movement that it really warrants its own plática, along with some of the other inequities in the movement, right? These are things we need to talk about. I want to apologize because we need to dedicate more time to a question like that, to that topic. And I didn't want to kind of ignore it because it would be, again, erasing queer Chicanos from the movement, and don't want to do that. I want to acknowledge that and acknowledge that happened in many different ways, and we should talk more about that.
Thank you, Roberto. We have Eddie.
Well, I was just going to say, I want to acknowledge that our sister Esther Hernandez is queer, and that Celia Rodriguez is parejas with Sherry Moraga, and Celia Rodriguez definitely had a big impact on RCAF, is from Sacramento, and she's a leading with Sherry, Sherry Moraga in, Chicana queer conversations and theories and practices. So that's not an excuse either, because I agree with Roberto. We need to share specific time, make specific time.
That's
so
right.
That's something that we're learning too, that we need to do.
Yeah, Seti, and to follow up with that as well, if there's participants who are interested in maybe contributing to these kinds of conversations, so want to move on and organize a much needed conversation on this topic, please, you know, I'm gonna drop in my email in there too, so you can contact me directly. We can have those kinds of conversations. If we could just go to the beginning slide where we have Ricardo Favela. So Ricardo Favela, just draw attention here to Ricardo Favela. There is a comment also to draw some comments, some plática to this piece at the beginning of the slide where he appears right in front, right? So maybe that's the second one. All right, I think the next one. Next slide, please. So this one here. So would any of you like to maybe touch on this this particular slide? I made some reference earlier in terms, you know, we have Ricardo Favela in Esquivole pose for those who need the translation of the Chicano vernacular. That's the what's up. So we have Ricardo Favela posing right in front of it, which is so iconic of his calavera, which is, again, Eddie, you mentioned the influence, Jose Guadalupe Posada, who is renowned for his calaveras. And we can see these, you know, the artistic influences, right? And also having those artistic influences embraced by Ricardo Favela in the production of these kinds of posters. Would either one of you like to touch on this poster a little bit more?
I can say something, and I want to just say that Ricardo, you know, really early on pioneered the use of the calaveras, and his calaveras are not flat; they're three-dimensional. They're really, he would always talk about life and death being different sides of the same coin, and using the calavera to almost strip off of our skin of our nakedness of who we really were as humans. And that goes with his pose of like, Iker, here I am. And that's actually like a self-portrait of him, you know, because Favela was the premier cheerleader, the public relations director of the Royal Chicano Air Force. Used to have baseball hats say RCAF. I wouldn't doubt if that baseball hat he's wearing says RCAF. He was RCAF all the way. And he named one of his daughters RCAF. Rosita, Adelita, Florentina. No. Rosita. Anyway, RCAF. And Rose, the Rose. And you know, it's interesting now because Dia de los Muertos is coming up, and that's another thing that's very interesting about the RCF is they have had Dia de los Muertos for over 40 years in Sacramento, which was a huge community event. The only Dia de los Muertos in the city, and of course now because it's become so popular, there's different ones. But the main one at St. Mary's, the procession, and then the mass and the danza at St. Mary's was iconic and beautiful, and used to happen at night with all the velas. And then of course, as things happen, like I read in Los Cortés Nos Chingón, the big way, El Way was there was gunshots one time. And then the church archdiocese said, we can't have it here anymore. So now it's during the day, which is a totally different aesthetic atmosphere than having it at night with all the velas and the danza azteca. And it was just beautiful. And hundreds of people, if not 1,000 people, showing up. Yeah.
Gracias, Eddie. Gracias. I'm gonna draw attention to the Q&As that we have. There's a question indicates, was there anything in particular that was consequential that led to the disbanding of the Royal Chicano Air Force, and when did that happen?
I just based on the conversation with Rudy last night, and then Eddie, you chime in if I'm off, but you know, at sort of like the end of the 70s, Centro de Artistas Chicanos ran out of funding And I think it's very important to mention that because, you know, we're experiencing that now, right? COVID-19 hits and all of our art centers close. And, you know, I direct 2 art centers and I'm working on a third because spaces are important. And towards the end of the 70s, the money was running out. And I don't know, and maybe Eddie can tell me, that there just wasn't enough grant money coming in to keep it open. I understand too that by now families were being formed, right? And so the needs change, right? And I think this is true for a lot of collectives, whether you're doing art or you're doing a social program. You know, when the money runs out and you're faced with a decision, you know, do you close? Do you borrow money, or do you find another job? And from what I understand, it was about finding another job, right? Professor Villa, Professor Montoya had jobs at Sac State, but the other members did not have those kinds of employment. They had to find other ways. I believe Rudy Cuellar and Louis the Foot opened a silk screening facility called Centro. What was it called, Eddie?
Central Graphics.
No, Centro Screen Print.
Oh, Central Screen Print. There you go.
Centro Screen Print. Yes, Centro Screen Print. Sorry, and they really tried to do that as a for-profit project, and that's challenging, right? Because you're in an art collective when people are used to bringing you subject matter and asking you to print posters and publicize their event through their artwork. And now they have to pay. It becomes a very different relationship. And the reason why I thought it was important to really talk about that is because it's what we're experiencing now, right? How do you fund these art programs? Like, how do you stay, how do you keep being an artist and keep producing your work? And, you know, these are subjects that we need to explore, whether it means more partnerships, collaborations, working on intersectionality, right? And finding ways to help each other. Because it's a real struggle for artists. And right now, I mean, it's tremendous, right? We can't go to centers, we can't see performances. Artists are not being able to perform, they can't make any money. You know, they're turning to the internet, they're trying to sell prints online. I know I'm buying as much as I can, but these are real issues that we need to talk about. And hopefully in Las Pláticas, we'll try to find some solutions here.
I just want to say that the Centro de Artistas Chicanos, it closed in 1985, but it was the third centro. They were on Folsom Boulevard, the original. Cheap rent, Max tells me, we got it for, Max organized that, got it for nothing. Then they went to the Guadalupe Church, and they got, in back of the church, they got a workshop going there, and they were doing their art there, but their art started evolving and they became controversial. The church said, you can't be doing this art here, because it was actually confronting a lot of the thought, the cultural thought, the cultural mainstream, let us say. And they were also very political. The third and final Centro de Artistas Chicanos was on Franklin Boulevard. And it used to be a recording studio, and they had a nice space. And the funding, people went off and got married, and so things kind of dissipated to the point where I think Rudy went to go work in the prisons, and and also Louis became a mailman.
That's right.
You know, so there was, but even though they had these other jobs, they were still doing the art. You know, so they were, you know, as Montoya would say, lean times. We fell on lean times, but you know, so it disbanded 87 rather. I mean 85. But one thing too is you have to understand that. Remember, the 80s were very prolific in terms of the decade of the word that came out at that time was his panic. I don't think the RCAF ever panicked, but they had to disband. Yeah, at least the central part. Yeah.
Gracias. Thank you, Roberto and Eddie, for those responses. I also want to draw attention to participants who are with us. You can find more information about the Royal Chicano Air Force if you follow the link that's on the screen right now. This is a library guide that was put together by COS Library. So thank you so much for putting this wonderful resource together, available online for free for all of you to watch and find more information about the Royal Chicano Air Force. This actual hyperlink that appears on the screen has been dropped in the chat box as well. So you can access that, click on it, so you can have that on your screen after this event is done. I also would like to take advantage of asking a question, Eddie and Roberto, in terms of just looking at like the themes in the series of posters that that you drew our attention to so many things that are in them. Like we're talking about topics of the farm workers, the campesinos, which is such an important topic here in the Central Valley. You have topics of food stability, right? The need to actually have these breakfast programs. We have topics of danza. You have the Aztec dancers. You have the topics of that we're trying to create interventions that provide support to the parolees and these kinds of things. So many topics, right? That they're still relevant in the present day.
And
Can I engage you guys in a conversation on that topic? So like, these kinds of things, this, how does that resonate with you guys? The fact that these issues that the Royal Chicano Air Force was bringing to attention through the Artivism, the artwork, and the fact that these are still issues with us today,
I think that historical memory is important. And I think that to be able to look back on this artwork and say, man, that's the same issue we're dealing with today, right? What is it? The prison pipeline, right? It's like, how do we keep our kids from getting locked up? How do we provide more opportunities to get them into education? Like Prop 16 can address some of that. I think what our biggest challenge is really, I guess it's one of those double-edged swords where you have technology that allows you to really disseminate information on a mass level, but it also hinders certain kinds of activism in person. I'm not just talking about now because of COVID-19, but the fact that we're still dealing with the same issues and we're not able to remedy them is frustrating. And how we go forward from here, I mean, it's all challenges, but I want to encourage anybody who's still with us that Artivism is for anybody. You don't have to be an artist. You don't technically have to be an activist. If you're interested in producing something that either promotes a social issue that you're interested in or can oppose a particular issue that you're against, that is Artivism at its core. So I just want to encourage people, if you're interested in that, get involved and do that kind of work, because you just never know what may come from it, right? Eddie,
I wanna say something. Is that I think because the RCF is based in Sacramento, and Sacramento is the capital of California. So there's a thing called the politica. And one thing that we must remember is that in these times, in the 70s and the last part of the 20th century, the population of California was of people of color, of Mexican Americans, was significant, but it is nowhere near where it is today. And because of that growth in population of Latinos, that growth in population of the youth cohort between 12 and 17, which is dominated by Latinos, and in California, Latinos means Mexicans, that is significant. And the politics against that group, this group, our group, has increased many-fold. So if we look back at we say, oh, but it already happened in the 20th century, the Living Grove incident, the affirmative action, the prison this, all these moves, the bilingual education, the end of bilingual education, all these things, true enough, but they were not said in the context of a group of people that is now the dominant group in the state of California. And we never say that. Yes, Black Lives Matter, but Black Lives Matter too, because a lot of raza are out there supporting Black Lives Matter. We support Asians. We support LGBTQ. We support everybody because we are a significant number of human beings in this state. And let us never forget, without Mexicans, we do not eat. And everybody likes to eat, but an essential workforce are our farm workers. But we never heard that. We never hear about that. So all these political things really fit into a lot of the adversity that we face because there's a fear of a brown planet. There's a fear that somebody listening to our words is going to say, you know what? I'm going to sign up for some classes at COS, and you know what? And now I'm going to transfer to Cal State, to UC, and I'm going to be a professional, and or now I have some information to teach my children, right? This is what the Chicano movement did for us. And this is why it's significant that we do these programs and we talk in these terms. Because yes, Artivism is important. Artivism, like the Black Lives Matters in Visalia, the youth that we engage with, they're beautiful and they're the future. Don't I think we should not ever forget that we are the future. Now,
I want to throw a shout out to Dignidad Rebelde, Melanie Cervantes, Jesus Barraza, and a lot of the other artists that are out there right now producing artwork. I have an extensive collection of their work. They're just two examples of a lot of the work that's being done right now. That list is very, very long, but I specifically enjoy looking at their artwork, particularly Melanie Cervantes. I'm a huge fan of her work. If you haven't seen the work that they produce, it's a very good example of Artivism today and looking retrospectively to the work that RCAF has done.
Thank you. Thank you for those responses, words of wisdom, and also acknowledging the wonderful work that's continuing to be done in the present day as well. I think it's very important. We're getting really close to our end time. Just wanted to give you a chance to say maybe some last words, Eddie, Roberto, and any last few words before getting into the closing of this event. You guys have been enlightening us with so many different commentary, looking at and engaging the artwork in such meaningful ways. But any closing words from?
I just want to say thank you again to the committee, the Favela Committee, COS and CHAP, all those who were involved in this project. I encourage our viewers to stay with us, keep signing up for the following Pláticas, put it on your calendar for spring of next year for the full-blown Ricardo Favela and the RCAF show. It's gonna be amazing. If you've never seen the full collection, we're gonna do the best to put on the best show we can. Thank you.
Yeah, I just would like to thank all the people who stayed with us. That we appreciate that, and we're trying to bring some enlightenment, consciousness, but also what I've learned along the way is it's a two-way street. It's not a one-way street. So thank you all of you. I would like to throw the RCAF has had a big influence on me. I've never studied art formally, but I feel so empowered by knowing about art from the artist. And I want to acknowledge that. Also, I hope you talk about our next speaker. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you both. Thank you both, Roberto and Eddie, for all the work that you put into making this event such a meaningful and insightful event about the Royal Chicano Air Force. And definitely you all who are with us, mark your calendars. Our next event is November 18th at 7 p.m. And it will be, highlighting Barbara Carrasco, who will be with us November 18th. It'll be a really good event. Again, I dropped my email in the chat box as well. If you want, you can be in touch, make sure that you get the flyer when it's circulating, and it will be via Zoom. It'll be via Zoom, so mark that on your calendars. And so also we have the following events as well. We have Dr. Ella Maria Diaz, who actually has a monograph, a full-length book on the Royal Chicano Air Force. It's titled Flying Under the Radar, who will be speaking on the 18th of February. We have March, the Ricardo Favela exhibit. And so this will be at the Arts of Visalia with the Flor y Canto reception. And so also we have in April, we have the filming of Singing Our Way to Freedom. So these are the upcoming events that we have. So mark those on your calendars and we'll have more information circulating. And thank you all of you who are with us to the last inning of this event. And so, and a special shout out to all the committee members. We have Roberto and Eddie who are part of the committee as well. So we have Barbara Lard, who's also James Espinosa, Amy Rangel, Dr. Lucia Vasquez, who's spearheading with this leadership. So many, Ampelio as well with the Arts Consortium, who's been very fundamental, Naricio Vasquez, and so counting on the support. So sorry if I missed anyone, and thank you all for our sponsors. Shout out here to the California Arts Council, a standout sponsor, and also for chat for jumping and so giving us the support this evening. So the Cultural Historical Awareness Program. So this brings our event to a conclusion. I wish you all a wonderful evening and continue your education on Ricardo Favela and Chicano expressions of art. Que pasen muy buenas noches y muchas gracias por estar aquí con nosotros. Good night, everyone. And thank you again, Roberto and Eddie.
Thank you.
Thank you.